Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Byline with Ben Dennis. I hope you had a great Mother's Day. I love my mom. I know she knows that from her 3 children, and I hope you spread that love wherever a mother-like figure exists in your life. I've got a question for you this week. Put on your thinking cap. Is there one voting system that is completely fair? Who decides what's fair? Democrats think they've got a good shot at winning back the House of Representatives come this November for the midterm elections. Republicans see recent court decisions in their favor, maybe improving their chances in some congressional districts. But how about President Trump's low approval rating? Democrats are betting that that might give them some momentum going into November. Republicans, again, they think that they have better chances given some of these circumstances we've seen in the headlines. But before the vote, we have to think about how we vote for president. It's not majority rules. We know how the Electoral College comes into play. And if we don't, we're about to get into that and why it matters and if really the United States should get out of this. Should the Electoral College be abolished? Is there any voting mechanism that's fair? What do you think? Well, it comes to the Senate, the House, majority rules. This comes after primary elections. We know this. What if I told you it all comes down to math? Math. My dad is a math teacher, administrator for schools, for young kids, and I did not get the math bone in my body, but I found the math surrounding the way we vote fascinating. And that is why we're here. What if I told you it comes down to arithmetic? What if you assign political candidates points like you're betting in a horse race? These are all real ways that leaders can determine how we vote. Should we take a hard look at this right now? Is it working, our current electoral system in this country? Voting is not just for politics. Think about sports, how we select Hall of Fame athletes, how a figure skater is awarded a gold versus a bronze or a silver, maybe even who wins a Grammy or an Academy Award for Best Picture, and who's determining and voting what universities come out on top. All of these questions come down to the numbers and the woman behind them to explain them to us and the options we have right now of how we can determine how we elect our own leaders. I throw them to Andrea Boito. She is a professor of mathematics at Penn State University, my alma mater. She happened to be my professor of a mathematics course that centered around this very subject, the science, the math of elections, how we can determine who we vote for, what systems are in place, what's the fairest of them all, what's the least. Is there a consensus that we can actually reach? She's diving into how these electoral systems work. Basically, she's given us options of how we can determine how we elect our leaders. Is that something we should be giving a hard look at? Andrea has some great insight into this. I found her course when I attended it back at Penn State Altoona, one of the so-called Commonwealth campuses, a branch campus across the state. I spent my first 2 years before finishing up at University Park and State College. But it was my favorite math course I think I ever took, and I am not a math guy. I fall into that journalism trap of, most journalists are not brainiacs when it comes to mathematics. That aside, this course fascinated me, and I think it has some relevant and timeliness to it. So with that, let's dive into why elections matter, why the way we vote matters, and if we can actually change it. If so, what should we be considering when we determine how we vote our elected leaders? Let's dive in. Andrea Boito, I appreciate you joining Byline. It's been a long time since we chatted. I was a student of yours at Penn State Altoona, in my humble opinion, which is the premier Commonwealth campus within the Penn State University Commonwealth University system. And your course had always stuck with me as someone who was always interested in politics. But this math class always piqued my interest. So I appreciate you joining and sharing a little bit about your expertise.
So I'm a math and statistics teacher at Penn State Altoona, and I must have had you in class over 10 years ago at this point. So it's very special to me that you remember my math class at all. The math class that you had with me was basically one that was for non-calculus based people. It was a general view of mathematics. So I'm excited to say that there are math classes where everybody can find something interesting. And the class that you had a lot to do with voting and apportionment and how we can, it's called social choice theory in mathematics. And so we actually push that toward like poli-sci and history majors because we think there's going to be something interesting in there for you.
Well, that was achieved. So certainly there is a math class for everybody. at least in my experience. So let me just tee it off with this. Why should people care about the voting systems that are used to elect our leaders?
Well, the way that we elect people basically is a mathematical thing about politics, right? We have to use math in some sort of way. So you want to try to choose the best method so that everybody feels like their voice is getting heard, right? However, what we have is this mathematical question without a political process. And there is more than one way to go about doing it. So people should understand how we choose our candidates for the winners and understand that there's not only one way to do it, but maybe understand that all of them have their pros and cons.
So let me piggyback off of that. Most of us would think, okay, majority rules, whoever gets the most votes wins. It is more complicated than that, than you had said, in more ways than one. So what do you think most people are missing about the process of how we elect our leaders?
So I think what people are missing is that no matter what method we choose, there's no mathematical way that we can be fair in our elections.
That's
That's
kind of
just the end
sad to
result.
hear, right?
It is sad to hear, but we always go around hearing life ain't fair. Nothing is fair, including how we vote for our candidates. We like to think, well, if I vote, then I should get what I want, and that's definitely not going to be true. And I think that's a struggle that people have is, well, how am I supposed to tell what I want and get what I want? But we can't all get what we want. Everybody has differing opinions. So there's a lot of ways to go about choosing it. And if you look at bills that have been pushed through for many, many years, people are always trying to change how we vote because no one is happy with the one way of voting. But no matter what we do mathematically, it's never going to be a fair system.
That kind of points out the fact that the same voters can cast the exact same vote, but there could be a different outcome because of the different systems that are in place, correct?
Exactly. So there's basically two main systems that are kind of in process in the United States right now. So the one method is what we call a plurality method. So think about how you vote in most states for your senator, your governor, your elector to the representatives. Basically, whoever has the most votes wins, right? So a lot of us go about doing what we call a single choice ballot, right? So that's what we know. You go in and you pick the one person that you want, and then whoever has the most votes wins. That's
Like when
called a
you're voting for
plurality.
student council president.
Yes, exactly, right? Now, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a majority of votes, and majority, as we know, means more than half the votes. So half plus one is all you need to win a majority. But with the plurality method, we don't care about a majority. We just care about the most, right? So some places, and including why I know this is of interest to you, is Washington, D.C. is going to be starting doing what's called a ranked choice ballot this coming year. So in a ranked choice ballot, we don't just vote for our first place choice. We are going to have all of the candidates and you are going to rank them in order of your preference. So whoever you really want the most gets rank one. Whoever you would kind of go for next is rank two, all the way down to the last choice. And with that ranked choice, what we can do is something called the Hare method. All right. And basically with the Hare method, what we do is we look for a majority of people choosing a candidate. So what we do is we say, all right, how many people chose this candidate for first place? If a majority of people chose it, they win by this Hare method. However, if no one wins a majority, we remove the candidate that has the least number of first place votes from the ballot. We then reassign their votes to the next preferred candidate on that preferential ballot. And then we say, all right, now does this candidate have a majority of first place votes again? And we keep on removing the candidate with the least number of first place votes and replacing their votes until we have a majority win.
So in that scenario, is there a possibility where someone who you don't vote for ultimately is reassigned, somebody else's vote and they're propped up? It kind of seems like it runs the gamut here.
Yeah. So basically, to be a fair election process, there's four different things that have to happen. Okay. One is called a majority criterion, which means if you have more than half of the votes in the first place, you should win all the time. No matter what kind of method you use, you should win all the time. And what we know is that's not always going to be true. Okay. The next thing that is critical for a fairness, an election to be considered fair, is something called the Condorcet criterion, which means if I go head to head with any person in any other candidate and I win, I beat you, I beat Sam, I beat Joe, I should be the winner of all the elections, right? Again, that's not always going to be true. And you can kind of look into this mathematically if you like to. Another one that's necessary to be fair is something called the monotonicity criterion. And monotonicity is kind of a really interesting. Basically, it says a candidate should not be harmed if if you don't remove any of that candidate's votes. So if they were going to win by an election process, and by another election process, I did not remove any of those first place votes, right? I should still be the winner. This is the problem with that Hare method, because whenever we take those votes away from the least preferred candidate, we give them to another one. You aren't not necessarily losing any of your original votes, but other people could gain more votes. Now we could have a different winner for that election. Right?
Who decides what's fair?
Who decides what's fair? So there is a fairness criteria that was created by, I believe it was created by Kenneth Arrow. Kenneth Arrow was an economist who actually won the Nobel Prize for his work in social choice theory. And we looked at all these different things that were necessary to be considered fair. There's one more called the independence of irrelevant alternatives, which is if I was going to win and someone else drops out of the race who wasn't going to win, shouldn't I still win? And as you can understand, because if I was going to win, but now someone drops out of the race, they reassign those votes to another person, now I might not be the winner. So
Right.
basically, what it means is by doing this, we are still creating a system that is not necessarily fair by the mathematical terminology of a fair voting method.
Well, when
And
I
Kenneth
think
Arrow
about
created this thing called the Arrow's Impossibility Theorem, which mathematically says if you have more than two candidates, there's no method of voting that is always going to look at all four of those fairness criteria and be always stay in place. So we can't have a fair voting method if you have more than two candidates, which we just naturally have.
right. I mean, listen, you've got two dominant political parties in the country, but by other pollings indicates it's a third of people would assign themselves to the Republican Party, a third to Democrats, and then there's a third in the middle, it's sticking its neck out there. And folks are always vying for votes. You had talked about, if someone drops out of a race and those votes are reassigned to somebody, I think of political conventions, especially when you have several different candidates who are vying for a nomination.
Great point. When you have that third party candidate in here, it just creates this kind of chaos, right? Because if you're on a two party system, you got two candidates, it's very easy, right? Whoever has the most votes is going to have the majority of votes, right? In that kind of system, unless we have a tie, and then there's a whole other battleground for that. We'd have to worry about tiebreakers. But if you only had two candidates, you wouldn't have these problems. But when we have more than two candidates, we cannot mathematically have that fair election because of people leaving and replacing votes and all that kind of good stuff. It just mathematically cannot happen. So even though we're changing the electoral process, in DC, especially right now, right, with that, it's still not going to make it fair mathematically because not everybody's vote is going to be, appropriated the right way. You're not going to. Someone's always got to be a winner and someone's always going to be a loser. And if we change the method of voting, we might have different winners and different losers. But then how is it fair if you can have different people winning, right?
Well, I think about that song. You don't always get what you want. But let me piggyback off of this strategic voting. People voting for somebody that they don't actually prefer because they think their real choice can't win. How often does that really happen?
Oh my gosh, you can think about a million times where that ever happened. It's called strategic voting. We always call it insincere voters. So, think about the last election, Harris versus Trump. People might have said, well, I don't like either candidate, but I'm going to pick the one that I think is the worst, or the better of the worst choices. And so I don't want to waste my vote. So I will put it for someone who I don't really want to win. Well, then are we really considering what our true feelings are in that election, or saying this is fair to me because I only have these two choices to make? So that's why they said, well, and this is a real big method with plurality method, when just looking at the most first place votes. If you have a lot of insincere voters in that strategic voting, then people aren't really saying what they want. It's not really getting across your feelings as a voter. And that's what you want as a voter, is to say, here's what I feel, here's what I want, how can I get it? Well, if you're just strategically voting, then you're not getting what you want. So that's why they put into place the ranked choice. Right? With ranked choice voting, you get to say, well, even though this candidate probably won't win, I'm still going to say, here's my first choice. Right? And then I could say my second choice is that person who's maybe of that party that I more affiliate with, even though they're not my preferred candidate. So people feel that, okay, well, I'm getting a real say in what I want then, right? Because I'm ranking these candidates. Problem becomes, how knowledgeable are you about all the other candidates, right? So you're just kind of, after your first two, you're like, well, I don't know this person, but I'll just mark them down. So how great is that for us as electors to not have a lot of knowledge and still be able to rank the people that are
Now,
involved
in
in it.
ranked choice voting, are you allowed to leave lines blank? Say you'd only know one or two candidates.
Yes, you can absolutely leave them blank. However, once all of the candidates that you have ranked are taken out of the election, then your ballot basically goes away. So if I choose candidate A first and B second, and I don't know anybody else, if A and B are eliminated, now my vote counts for nothing. So it's a wasted ballot.
I mean, you could talk about the morality behind it too. Some people may say, okay, fine, I don't care about the other candidates. I put in my vote for who I wanted, whether it's so-called wasted or not in that scenario. I feel like
And
that
that's
could be a
fine, right?
possibility.
So then the question is it morally better for you to rank people that you don't have knowledge of, or to not get a say in the election at the end? And I'm a mathematician.
That's
I am not a politician, right? I
I get
the
it.
math
Yes.
business, right? So I don't have a good idea of what the morals are. In my mind, if you don't have a complete ballot, it stresses me out because now I'm losing those voters for the election. But if that's how you truly feel and you would rather not rank candidates that you don't know about, that's your feeling too. That's fine. You know what I mean?
So let me ask this. When you have more than two candidates, when an election is not person A or person B, where someone is clearly going to be getting 50% or more of the vote, is ranked choice a fair way of tackling all this?
Is it mathematically fair? No,
Yeah.
it can't be. It cannot be because ranked choice voting and the method we're talking about is called the Hare method. There are other methods that you can use with ranked choice voting, but it actually has the potential to violate what we call the monotonicity criteria, where we're replacing that candidate and could have different winners. It violates the Condorcet criteria, where if we have head-to-head matchups, we might have different answers. And it violates the last criteria, which is the IIA, or the independence of irrelevant alternatives criteria, because if someone who wasn't going to win drops out of the base, now you still might have another candidate getting more votes, and so you might have a different winner. So it actually still violates mathematically I should say, it has the potential to violate some of the criteria, which means you could get a different winner if you used a different method of voting. So
Voting
no,
methods that are
mathematically, it's still
sticking
not
their
fair.
are there voting methods that are sticking their necks out there that we've never
So there's another method called the board account method. And board account is how we think about how we choose like the NCAA top 10 teams where the different people vote. They rank the teams that they think are who do they think is number one, who they feel is number two, number three. So every week we have that new poll. They use something called the board account method. It also is a ranked choice method where we're ranking the candidates in order. But then what they do is they apply points for each place, and whoever has the most points wins by a board account. Fun thing, still not mathematically fair. There's another method called the pairwise comparison methods, where think of like a round robin tournament. Like if you're at a tournament for your kids, soccer game, volleyball game, whatever it is, where you play every team, right? So I beat team A, I beat team B, I beat team C. Then shouldn't I win everything? Again, that's not mathematically fair. And it would take a lot of effort to do all of those different battles, especially when you have a lot of different candidates. So there are more methods of voting, but mathematically, they have never found one that will always fulfill all of the four fairness criteria that we have. And that's why the impossibility theorem is called that, because it is impossible to find a fair voting method when you have more than two candidates.
does somebody win a Nobel
Disappointing, isn't
Prize
it?
if you can't find a fair election process?
Well, because he found something that's really important to know, which means stop searching, right? So basically, what we have to do is we have to pick which one we think is a best method to use for our electoral process. But we have to go in knowing that whatever we do, even if we do right choice or we do single ballot, whatever method we use, there's still not going to be somebody happy. And if we had used another method, we might have had a different winner. And
I
that's
want
what
to
it means by
ask.
fair. Fair means we could have a different winner by a different method. Yeah, I should
So
say that too.
intriguing. I mean, I found it fascinating some 10 years ago when I was sitting in those cold desks in a small little classroom. Let me
It's
pivot to this.
worse.
This is going, yeah, right. This is going down the basic civics route. The Electoral College. People may not understand how it works, why we have it. Folks, especially if their candidate loses an election after receiving the popular vote, i.e. Hillary Clinton in 2016, They're beating the
right?
drum saying, hey, let's abolish the Electoral College because guess what? You aren't voting for president. You're basically, you have people who are voting on your behalf. Can you just explain for some of our listeners to peel back the curtain a little bit of the system that we have right now, for at least for president?
Sure. So the Electoral College was created long ago because we couldn't all have all our people get together, in the 1700s and join together and vote and get an answer, right? And they felt that, from what I understand, because I'm not a history person, but from my readings, the people creating the Constitution didn't feel that more people would be as knowledgeable to vote for the president. So they would vote for a person who would represent them, their elector in the Electoral College, of what was happening so that they could better tell them how they wanted to vote for president. So the
Seems kind
Electoral
of
College is
insulting, right?
different than, no, well, but was it insulting or was it true? I don't know, right? Let's be
Well, these
honest.
days, I guess you could ask the same thing these
And
days, but
these
right
days,
now,
I
it
think we're
sounds
much more
insulting,
knowledgeable.
Yeah.
Right. But now we have information who's, flowing to us, a million pieces of information flowing to us in a second. It's completely different than it was in the 1800s. Now we have the information they didn't then, right? You had to wait till you got the mail, so you got some sort of news, that they didn't have it. So
And it could
they
be
created
real
this
or it could
system.
be misinformation
So
too.
this is very true. I have no opinions on
Sorry,
that.
I get it.
So whenever we vote for like our governor or mayor or things like that, right? It's every person gets one vote and all of our votes are equal. With the Electoral College, however, our votes are not all equal because now we get electors in proportion to the population of our state, right? So for the Electoral College, every state gets their number of senators plus their number of representatives assigned to them, right? Except for special DC. DC gets 3 all the time. So the interesting thing is the way it used to be is whoever got the popular vote in the state got all the electors for that state. So it was very easy to figure out. However, now some of the states have changed. Maine, Nebraska, and I believe DC now can split their electoral college votes. So if you get a majority, you don't necessarily get all the electoral college votes at this time, right? However, with Maine, Nebraska, and DC, that's probably not going to factor in terribly into the difference of the election
Unless
results
it's very, very
with those
close,
3
but
splitting
you're
their
right.
vote.
Yeah.
It was very close. All right. So what happens is we have to figure out the senators are easy, right? Everybody gets those 2. But how do we figure out how many representatives each state gets? Well, guess what? That all comes down to math, as you remember from class, right? So this is where we have to take the number of seats in the House and we have to apportion them to the states depending upon their population. So whenever we apportion, we are dividing things according to some sort of plan. And there's not just 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. There are like 5 or 6 different apportionment methods that we can do as well. And all of those depend upon rounding numbers. And you remember all this from, your elementary school days, right? So the way it all works, and mathematically, I'm sorry, but, kind of go into the idea, right? So there's 435 seats in the House right now, right? And we have to divide 435 seats into all of those 50 states somehow. How do you do it? Well, that's going to come out to not be a whole number, right? So how do we round them? Do we round it up? Do we round it down? What do we round it by? And so it all comes down to mathematics. So do you want me to go over some of the different apportionment plans?
Absolutely. I brought you on to kind of
controversy?
nerd out about math for sure.
All right, nerdy. Here we go. All right. So one method that was created was by Alexander Hamilton, who we all know now. Right? Whenever I had you years ago, Hamilton wasn't even a mythical. We had no idea. Now we know so much about Hamilton. Okay. All right. So Hamilton's method was to take all of your exact number of representatives you were supposed to have, which is basically going to be probably not a whole number, and you're going to round it down. Right. So if I was supposed to get 13.2 people represented to me, I'm going to get 13. So everybody rounds down. And then once we've given away everybody by their rounding, we're just going to just hand it out by what's called the highest residue. And the residue is the decimal place that was attached to your original number. So if you have the highest decimal, you get an extra seat. And you got another one available, you got the next highest decimal, you get an extra seat. It's like Oprah, you get a seat and you get a seat and you get a seat until I run out of seats. So that's Hamilton's method. Another one that came up, though, was Thomas Jefferson's method. So Jefferson had the same idea, which he was going to round everybody down. So I had 12.3, you get 12. But now if I have given away too few seats in the end, what we do is we modify things. And I love this because we just modify it to make things fit. So we
According
get to change
what?
how many, according to what? Exactly. That is the right answer. So whenever we figure out Here's another little backstory. So the Constitution did not say how many people were going to be represented by each representative. Okay. All it said, it had to be not more than one for every 30,000 people. So not more
Right.
than one representative for every 30,000 people was the Constitution. But they didn't say anything more than that. They're like, oh, we'll just wing it. Okay. So that what we represent is called our standard divisor. So if we had a standardized divisor of 30,000 people, we get one rep for every 30,000 people. So we have to mathematically figure out what is the exact divisor because we have a giant population of people. We have 435 seats to give away. So that's how we now figure out how many people are represented by each representative. That's our divisor. Now, if we haven't given away the right number of seats by Hamilton's method, we just modify the divisor. If we were supposed to have one representative for every 30,000, we'll be like, oh, let's do one representative for every 26,000 instead. We just change it.
Well, I mean,
Seriously.
we
I like to
essentially
look in
did
your
that,
eyes.
right? Because we would have so many more members of the House right now.
Right. Because we have a fixed number of seats in the House, we have to just change the divisor because we can't change the number of seats and we can't change the population. It's our only choice.
Well, let
So
me
we
ask you this:
modify that divisor.
will we have to? I want to go back to that, but in order to expand the House, would you have to change the Constitution, or is there another way mathematically to go about this?
That would be so the last bill that was put in about apportionment, it was 1941 Apportionment Act, set the House of Representatives at 435 people and
Okay,
set forth the method of apportionment that we were going to use. So that was last created in 1941, and so that would require an entire bill to be passed, proposed, and taken care of.
sure. Okay.
That we can't just magically do. Yeah, so we've had the same number of seats in the House of Representatives since 1941, although our population hasn't changed. So each representative is representing definitely more people than we've had in the past, right? Even though it was supposed to not exceed one for every 30,000 in the Constitution.
Right. Here we are.
And here we are.
Let,
All
let
right, so
me.
don't with that we just get to magically change what we have. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. You're the
No.
that how we apportion can change the number of representatives each state has because we have the 5 different major methods right now, and you could actually have a different apportionment by using any of those 5 different methods. Fun stuff, right?
I mean,
Here's a fun
listen.
fact
If you
for
have,
you.
yeah, go ahead. Fun fact.
Fun trivia for the day. Did you know what the first veto ever in the United States was about?
No, hit me.
Apportionment methods.
Who was it?
So George Washington's very first veto was because of apportionment. So there's a bill put forward to the House to use Hamilton's method to apportion the House of Representatives. And due to fairness, we'll just kind of go on record to saying, right? You can look into the history. It's very fun stuff. Thomas Jefferson actually persuaded him to veto that. And they were not able to use Hamilton's method. The first method of apportionment that was ever used was Jefferson's because of that veto. So that's how important it is.
What was the whole motivation of rounding down, in the Hamilton's method and Jefferson's method? Obviously, Jefferson had this modification section, if you will. What was the whole reason of rounding down, and why would you give the extra points available, if you will, to the folks who had the highest, or number after the decimal?
The highest decimal place in their number, right? Well, because you got to give the seats away to somebody, right? Well, what's funny about Jefferson's method and Hamilton's method is they actually favor large states. And where was Jefferson from?
Virginia,
which was a big state at the time, right? So his method, by rounding down, right, you rounded it down so everybody was guaranteed to get what their bare minimum was, right? Right. I have 12.3. Well, it'd be kind of unfair if I went down to 10 or 9 or 11, right? I should get 12, right? At least 12, maybe 13, because I'm between those two numbers. And this is something called the quota rule, which is very important in apportionment, that to be fair, right, because we're all talking about fairness, that I should either get my original number rounded down or my original number rounded up. I shouldn't go beyond that. My quota was, I deserve 12.3 reps. I should either get 12 or 13. It only seems fair, right? Well, with Jefferson's method, we can violate that, right? And what can happen is when we start modifying that divisor for Jefferson's method, we can actually give the smaller states less seats and the bigger states more seats. Right. So the bigger states actually have an advantage to this. It can actually have an upper quota violation, which means if you have a quota of 12.3, it's possible for you to get 14 seats assigned to you.
And who
So it's
makes
not very
those
fair.
decisions to assign those decisions?
So that's the mathematical rounding decision is how that happens. But who modifies the divisor? We just modify the divisor to make it work out to be the right number of seats. And if it so happens that someone gets more than that upper quota, it works out, right? We gave away the right number of seats. That's the goal. That is the end goal of apportionment.
If folks wanted to make the electoral system more fair in your eyes, how would they go about it?
You can't. You absolutely can't.
Flat
Would
out.
you like
There's
another
no other
fun
way.
mathematical theorem?
Yes.
Okay, so there were some mathematicians named Belinsky and Young. Actually, they were politicians, mathematicians. I'd have to look into that more. Don't quote me if I'm wrong. I'm sorry. But Belinsky and Young discovered their impossibility theorem that said if the size of your house is fixed, a system that always follows the quota rule, which means you either get your original up or down, has the potential to have what's called a paradox. And if a system can
Great.
never have a paradox, then you have the possibility of violating the quota rule, which basically means there's no fair method of apportionment either. You're welcome.
So we're stuck between a rock and a hard place, is what you're telling me.
We are because, and you want me to explain paradoxes. So as I was explaining with Jefferson, it can have a paradox, or sorry, it can have a quota rule where you can get more seats than you should allow, right? They started saying, well, if that's a problem, then let's have another method. So John Quincy Adams introduced a method. John Quincy Adams' method was, well, remember where John Quincy Adams was from? Of course, because you're a history buff. Massachusetts, right? Small state. So he created one to favor the small states instead. So what he did was he rounded everything up instead. So where Jefferson said, if you had 12.3, you're always going down to 12. Adams said, you got 12.3, we're going up to 13. So everybody's rounding up. So you're getting more seats. But
Yeah,
the
he had
problem
a
is
stake in
when
the
you
game.
add
He
all
wanted to
those
stay
together,
relevant.
right, you get them all together, then you probably gave away too many seats. So guess what you have to do? Modify the divisor again,
Why not
right?
just
So
create an
you just
extra seat at that point?
arbitrarily change the representation, and now you keep on changing that until you get to the right number of seats. And
Well,
now
with
that
those,
one can have what we call a lower quota violation, where you can go below the number of that original quota that I was allowing. I could go below it instead.
what about
Love
if
it.
you had all those extra points at the end? Why not just create an extra seat and just say, hey, no one's going to get all this. We're just going to create a new seat.
Well, you could do that, but not in our House of Representatives, because by the 1941 Act, we were limited to 435 seats, right? All right, so but now let's go into this more, because you're like, well, Jefferson is like, I'm going down with everything, and Adams is like, I'm going up, right? So they had a compromise. So Daniel Webster, ever heard of that name before in your history books? Daniel Webster created a compromise. So remember how we learn how to round when we're in elementary school, right? If it's the number decimal is below 0.5, you go down. If it's 0.5 or above, you go up, right? That's our natural rounding, right? So he said, let's do that. Guess what? You can give away the wrong number of seats again. So if you haven't given away the right number of seats when you're rounding either up or down, because people could be either way, guess what we do? We modify the divisor again arbitrarily. We then round those new numbers by that decimal, and we can have upper or lower quota violations. This time we're giving away
Lord.
too many or too few seats beyond your original allowance. So then they came up with another method. And this one was done by some mathematicians and statisticians. This is called the Huntington Hill method.
I remember hearing about this. I'm a sucker for
You remember that
alliteration, so
one?
I remember this. Yes, go ahead.
You remember this one? All right, that's good. All right, so what we did with the Webster method is we round by what's called the arithmetic mean. The arithmetic means we add two numbers together that are beside each other and divide by 2. So like you had 13.2, you round down your 13, you round up your 14. So you take the average of 13 and 14, which is 13.5. That's how we round it. But that's not the only mean in the world, in case you don't remember that mathematically. There's something called a geometric mean. The geometric mean is the square root of the product of two numbers. There you go. Just blowing the little math brain again right there. Ben,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
exactly. I know. I'm
Right?
fuming.
So you multiply the two numbers together that are beside each other and take the square root of them. And then we round by the geometric mean instead. It's just another way of doing means. Okay. But guess what can happen when we round by the geometric mean, either up or down? We still might not have the right number of numbers, which means we have to modify the divisor again, and we can still have problems with that quota rule. So the current method that we use in the United States, the one that was set in place in 1941, is the Huntington Hill method, right? But we know we can still have potential quota rule violations with that method.
What do you think some of the biggest questions, or at least the questions that routinely pop up from your students, are about our current electoral process and possibly changing it?
Definitely, they get really upset. They get very upset when they think about the popular vote being different than the electoral vote, right?
Yeah. Andrea, is there anything else that you think that folks who have, because here on the podcast, we really like to go beyond the headlines and really explain why they matter to people, which is why I wanted to have you on to give context of why voting matters, why the process of voting matters as well. Is there anything that you want people to know, about the way that we elect our leaders, key takeaway possibly of maybe the importance of voting and just the way that we currently are allowed to cast our own votes?
I mean, I think it's really important that you vote. I mean, you should try to you should have a say in your government, right? That's obvious. So you should exercise your right to vote. But what I want people to understand is there's a lot of ways of choosing a winner from our voting processes, right? But we as a country have to understand that no matter what way we do it, there's a possibility that we could have had another winner by a different method. But somehow our government has to choose a method of making the winner happen, right? So we have to kind of go along with the process and just say, well, this is the method that we have. This is the winner that we have. Even if you fight it and try to fight for another voting process, doesn't mean everybody's going to be happy. And it doesn't mean that method is any more fair than any other. So, I
Sure.
mean, you can go on, I was doing a lot of research like on fairvote.org, things like that, right? And they go through, here's the benefits of doing the preferential choice ballot, and here's this and that. Maybe, maybe morally they feel that there's a fair method to it, right? Or more fair method about getting your vote across. But I'm not a politician. I'm not I'm not a social scientist. I'm not anything like that. All I am is a mathematician. And I can tell you that no matter what vote you use, it will not be mathematically fair. So please don't come at me online and start telling me that I don't know what I'm talking about and that this method works and this method works. And that might very well work socially, but mathematically, which is my focus, we cannot have a fair method of voting.
But when it comes down to it, we are given the systems that we are handed, and if you don't vote, then you're not going to have a say whatsoever.
Exactly. And if you don't vote, then you can't whine. That's my rule, right?
I think my dad told me that once as well. So first thing I did when I turned 18 was I signed up to vote, and I went and bought a cigar. I felt like a full adult at that time. In that order, though. In that order.
That very good, Dad. Very, very good.
Yes, had to do my civic duty. Andre, I really appreciate it. It's nice to catch up with you. I'm still fascinated by all of this and the fact that life isn't fair, and neither are our voting structures. So I appreciate your time.
Can't even tell you how much it means to me, Ben, that you remembered a math class, even though it was probably one of your least favorite topics, that you remembered that. That really means something to me as a professor, that it impacted your life in this way. So thank you.
Well, of course, no. Listen, college was a time when you're exploring your own social life, politics, etc., and I certainly fell down that rabbit hole. So after years and years of making my dad cringe that I didn't like a math class, even though he was a math teacher, I finally found one. So here we are.
And that's why, hey, general ed in college, people are like, why do I have to take that class? Because you never know. You can actually learn something that is actually useful in your life, like just your daily, voting and fairness and idea about your government, right?
Well, I would push back on the biology classes that I had to take, but there's that.
Yeah, I'd push back on my history classes, but that's just me. No, I'm just kidding.
Andre, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. I appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed my chat with Andrea. She has a great course, and the way that she delivers that course, I found fascinating, gave me great insight of how we can determine who we elect, the process at play. Are there winners and losers? Who ultimately comes out on top is determinative of how we elect them. Something to consider as we head into the midterm elections and before the 2028 presidential election. Also something to consider when we see how other countries handle their own leadership. Well, you can certainly get into what's going on in Iran and Venezuela. Certainly top headlines lately in terms of reestablishing some sort of administrative rule. And elections are going to be part of that conversation. So with that, I hope you have an amazing week. I can't wait to dive in. Next week, got a special episode coming out. I won't tease too much, but I'll be dropping some hits along the way on social media. With that, have a great next 7 days, everybody. Take it easy.